The Battle of Brunete, July 1937. This stone and this square commemorate the victory of Francisco Franco. It was at Brunete that many Welshmen fighting in the Spanish Civil War saw action for the first time. Edwin Greening of Aberdare.
Well, you know what war is like? In Spain, it was absolute hell. I soon realized the first day I was in action that we were outgunned and outmanned. For every shell that our guns sent over, we received 50 back. The fascist planes and tanks were everywhere. Their mortars rained destruction everywhere. It was absolute hell. And after 12 to 15 days of no sleep, hardly any food, unwashed, we were completely exhausted. When we got out, we threw into reserve, we threw ourselves under the olive trees and slept for 2 days without a stop. All that we did was wait for the shout, grub up, and we went wearily and got the grub, and some grub it was. Mostly bean stew with a little meat, some coffee and bread, but the Spanish government couldn't help that. They were facing a savage war where the fascist powers were blockading Spain with the tolerance of the Western powers. But what a relief to get out of this hell of action in the line.
Most, but not all, of the British volunteers in Spain were members of the Communist Party. The first Welshman to get there, at a time when there were very few English-speaking volunteers about, was Will Lloyd.
We went right through Madrid and we had a great welcome from the people there. Numbers of people shouting, Rusky, Rusky, they thought we were Russians. There we made contact with the Garibaldi battalion, an Italian battalion. All these had these red neckerchiefs, you know, very colourful. And when they talk about Italians can't fight, these men, you should have seen these men fighting. They were great.
One Welshman fought on the side of Franco. He went into a Cardiff travel agency, booked a ticket for Lisbon, and crossed into Spain. Frank Thomas.
The attitude I had when I went to Spain is quite simply summed up. I left school in 1931. I was a chicken farmer for several years. Then I became a commercial traveller for a couple of years. And I got absolutely fed up calling on the same people every day, every journey. It was the same people, the same towns, and I got so fed up I wanted to do something active. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, the Civil War broke out in Spain. So I thought, well, this is an opportunity to develop my career. And it was from there the idea came to go to Spain. I chose the side I chose because, frankly, I've always been right-wing in politics. I wouldn't say extreme right-wing, but definitely right-wing. As a result, I couldn't fight on the left-wing side. In addition, at that time, there had been quite a few pictorial records of things which were being done in Spain, burning of churches, etc., etc. And although I was a Protestant, it just didn't go down with me. So obviously, I chose Franco's side. I suppose the notion of joining the Spanish Foreign Legion appealed to me from a romantic angle. This is why possibly the idea of joining came into my mind, having made up my mind originally that this was an opportunity to get away from the humdrum existence I was leading.
Franco had received his first batch of bombers from Mussolini and the first of his Junkers from Hitler within 10 days of the start of the war. Early on, before a communist discipline was imposed on the rough and ready Republican army, there were all sorts of splits and factions. There was a joke that said that the anarchist military code ran like this. Paragraph 1, there shall be no order at all. Paragraph 2, no one shall be obliged to comply with the preceding paragraph.
When we went there, the communists had their own battalions, the socialists had their battalions, the anarchists, the POOM had their own battalions, and they were running it as an independent army. Many stories came that the anarchists wouldn't fight on certain days because it was a celebration or some celebration they had. The socialists wouldn't combine with these. And we had these stories constantly told us as soldiers. Now it is later that we had an unified command. But I've seen personally young Spaniards who would come up the line, fight, and go back home for the night. I've seen them lighting fires in the front line, which is a stupid thing to do.
The communists had regiments. The 5th Regiment was a noted one, and tremendous fighters. And the anarchists had the Durruti division, and the Republicans had another, but they had crack units, each of these political groupings. And it was very difficult because sometimes there was serious disagreement between them, and in particular the anarchists, because they would sometimes not like the officers they had elected. And if they'd had a bit of a mess in a battle, they'd probably try the officers and shoot them because of the mistakes they had made.
Early on, Frank Thomas got a Republican bullet through his cheek.
In those days, the Foreign Legion was a Foreign Legion. We had plain adventurers, we had criminals possibly, people who had religious beliefs, people who just wanted to disappear. We had all sorts. Discipline was very, very strong. The main thing was your rifle had to be clean at all times. This was the cardinal thing. I've seen an officer kick a man because his rifle was dirty. On the training ground, corporals used whips. We had these sort of whips, bull whips, which were used. I mean, not unnecessarily, but certainly were used. This is how the Legion ran. They had to maintain some sort of discipline. And of course they had come over from Africa. Some of them were very long service legionnaires who'd been there for many years. They had no home at all, nothing, only the Legion.
I was, by temperament, by influence, by the impact of my home and town environment, more the pacifist than the militarist. And this inevitably gave rise to a profound personal crisis, a crisis that had to be met, the challenge had to be met head-on, for there I was now on Spanish soil. And I suppose what sustained me in my own personal crisis was my profound conviction that I'd entered quite freely into the cause of the Republicans. I was determined to fight this battle and to sustain my commitment to the cause to the very end.
When I looked at the churches that we had to destroy or damage very badly, it always hurt me, and indeed any building, because some of the buildings were very beautiful, and churches in particular. And there was a feeling that I was doing the wrong thing. But you see, the fascists used these churches as fortifications, and it was at Belchite where 500, we'd captured the small town, but 500 fascists had made a fortress out of the church. So they wouldn't surrender, so we had to make them surrender, and we had to blow at the church.
This is Belchite as it stands today, left as a monument.
Eventually we had to fetch up French 75s in order to get them out. And we did get them out. The men would have given in much earlier, but the officers were shooting them every time they attempted to run away from the church, you see, how to get out. And most of the people inside that church were destroyed by our fire.
Suddenly, we started meeting greater opposition, and ultimately, this was the International Brigade beginning to show itself. They ultimately became established as battalions, and we recognized that they were being used as on the same principle as we in the Foreign Legion. In other words, as shock troops. they, like us, at least we were, and I assume they were moved from area to fill in spaces, if you like. We'd meet resistance or take an object, and as soon as this was done, we would be relieved by ordinary troops and moved on again.
We've been sent down for what they called the officer training school. And if you can imagine now, British, and in British I include Irish, Scots, English and Welsh, French, Germans, Yugoslavians, Czechoslovakians, Americans. Well, there were 34 nations supposed to be fighting in the Republican Army. I wouldn't say that there was one from every nation in the school, but there'd be half a dozen or more different nationalities. And then the two main lecturers were a chap by the name of Johnson from America and Ramon, whether that was his name or not, I don't know, from Russia. And you can just imagine now Johnson lecturing or saying his piece in English on a given point. After about 5 minutes, somebody would say, well, I'll translate this now from English to French. Then somebody would say after, well, I'll translate it now from French to German. Then somebody would say, I'll translate it from German to Spanish, so that you'd have 6, 7 or 8 translations. And you can imagine that whatever Johnson had said at the beginning was nothing like what was being said at the end of the lecture, or the end of the translations. And if a fella could only remember all that was told him by both of these, and other lecturers as well, but these were the main two lecturers, if you could only remember everything that had been told you, plus what you had picked up yourself, you could have been possibly good enough to command the NATO alliance, if you like, because they gave you everything connected with war, how to stop tanks. And I mean, this is a frightful thing in itself. When you think of a tank coming up towards you, and then some of these fellows say they can be stopped, quite simple. And somehow or other it is simple, or it was simple in those days. You had a hand grenade, threw it under the trap so that the belts, or the whatever you call them, that's around the wheels, as long as this is blown away, well then the tank is useless. And somehow or other, everything that these fellows told us was so simple that you wondered why anybody had ever been killed in war.
It was here on July the 6th, 1937, in the awful heat of the featureless plain northwest of Madrid, that there began one of the fiercest battles of the Civil War. In a few square miles around the nondescript village of Brunete, the Republicans sought to divert Franco's forces from attacks they were making in the north. Brunete had a population of only 1,500. Within a fortnight, with each side claiming victory, there were going to be strewn in these fields 37,000 casualties, including thousands of dead. Here, the International Brigade lost 50% of its men. Alan Menai Williams.
At one period, I was busy dressing people. They were laying down in lines. Nobody could attend to them. They were dying because I couldn't attend to them. And there was some terrible casualties, and there was no facilities to attend to the casualties. People were just dying because I didn't have enough tourniquets. There was not enough expertise on the team I had.
Well, I was seeing death at first hand, and there was a small village before reaching Brunete, and I remember we got into that village, and there were women and children lying about in the streets being killed by shells, bombs and bullets. And it was a disturbing sight. And you had to get used to this kind of thing. And then to get used to seeing your own colleagues being wiped out. We were dragging an anti-tanker in one spot there, and one man on the right, who was very tall, he was about 6'2", a shell came and blew his head off, and he was still walking for the next 20 or 30 yards.
All his life, Jack Roberts went on wondering about his first day at Brunete. Close to him had been two volunteers, one everybody called the Great Dane, and this English lad called Bird, inevitably nicknamed Dickie, who'd been more or less adopted by the Welsh.
Somebody asked him where he'd be from. We had taught him to say that he was from Nangarrow. And for a Londoner, fair play, Dickie could say it, Nangarrow, like, not quite as good as we say, but possible enough. And somehow or other, Dickie and myself were drawn closer together. Because mind, I'd be old enough to be Dickie's father. Because Dickie would be about 19 or 20, and I'm about 37. See, so I'd be old enough to be Dickie's father. But somehow or other, we were drawn together. And whether it was a father-son complex or not, I don't know, but we were always together. The first day, around about 8 o'clock, we're getting near this particular village. And we're going through this ploughed field. Dickie Bird, myself in the middle, and the Big Dane. And I can remember the Big Dane saying, now, oh, my bloody leg. He'd been wounded in the leg, apparently. But our instruction has been, you don't stop in action. The first aid people will come along to see to the wounded. Well, after a while, we went into the village. We had a roll call there, about 11 at night. And I asked then somebody, where was Dickie Bird? And they turned around and told me that I should know. I said, why? Well, I said, Dickie Bird had it in the ploughed field. So the assumption was that the bullet had gone through Dickie's tummy, passed me either in front or behind, and landed in the leg of the Big Dane. So that, I don't know exactly how I'd have behaved if I'd have known that Dickie Bird had died. I don't know.
I passed these men, and as I passed them, I said, salute. And yet there was something strange about them. I said, salute back, and I walked past. Well, I went a couple hundred yards, and there was one soldier sitting down on his own. And I had love a spell now. I could see an aeroplane flying over Brunete. So I thought, love a spell now before he was bombing. I sat down by this Spanish boy, and I said to him, fascist aeroplane, in his language, and he said yes. And he looked at him, and I said, oh, no, never. I was sitting down talking to a fascist. The uniform was entirely different to us. So, as I said, I told him about the aeroplane. He said, yes. Well, I said, I'm leaving you now. Because I realized that the men that behind me wasn't as Spaniards, they were Italian soldiers. So I thought, as soon as I get out of this lot, the better. Well, I got down to the village. Well, a couple of hundred yards from the village, the first thing that upset me was I seen one of our tanks direct it, and I seen one of the crew on the side of the road like a cork, being actually, burnt to death.
We'd been outside the village, I should imagine, now for about an hour and a half, or perhaps longer. And sometime in the evening, somebody's coming out of the village with the white flag. And then lots of our fellas had gone from the ditches and whatever they'd been hiding or sheltering or taking cover, got into the middle of the road to welcome these that were surrendering. When they were about 10, 15 yards away from our chaps, some of the people that was behind the forward march threw hand grenades amongst our chaps. And we lost quite a lot of fellows then, and lots of chaps were wounded. And this was the pattern, apparently, that they're using the women and children of the village as a cover, and then throwing these grenades over, and they run away at the back after having caused a commotion. And the same thing happened after in Quinto.
I went into this vast barn. With me were about 10 of the soldiers who had just followed me in. I heard a scuffling, and I said, quiet please, somebody here. We scraped the A off the floor, and there was a trap door. He lifted the trap door and shouted, "Wenger." And I started to walk down the steps when Copeman came and going to push me back out of the way and going to throw a bomb. He made the motion of putting an hand grenade there. And I said, "Don't be so bloody silly." And suddenly a young woman handed up a child. It was stiff with terror. A young girl about 11 years of age. I lifted her up, and turned her to another soldier and left her down. And then suddenly another little kid about 9, a boy 9 years of age. The terror, you know, your blood run cold.
There was a crowd of our boys all laying about dead. One was Ford, a coloured man from America. He was secretary of the American Communist Party. And I seen one body laying on the road, only his head I could see. And I said to one of the boys, I said, I know who that is. I said, "It's Saddam from Cardiff. He come out with me." He said, "Well, go and have a look." I said, "No, if I go and look at him," I said, "I'll go down with him."
Just before it was getting dark, and it doesn't take long to get dark in Spain, it's light and then dark, the people who were coming out of that village, women, children, all the rest of them, and when they got to where our line was supposed to be, but which unfortunately seemed to be about 100 yards behind us, because Jack and I were left on our own. I walked up to the road now thinking that they were going to give themselves up, and all hell broke loose. They started shooting and throwing grenades and Lord knows what. But there was a fellow lying on the ground, George Brown. He'd been wounded, I think he had in the leg. I couldn't be sure because I didn't have time for anything. I put my rifle down, I got on my knees to see if I could help him, and I looked up and there was a fellow with a rifle, not 12 yards away. Well, he fired that shot and he hit me in the chest, and I thought he'd thrown the village at me. There's such a terrific bang that it's hard to believe that a small bullet can hit so damned hard. It spun me right around. Then he had 2 more goes. He just grazed my thigh and he just grazed my ankle. I thank God he was a poor shot. But he didn't make any mistake with George Brown. He started firing into George and he finished George, and I had to lie there more or less half unconscious, playing possum like, till our boys come up.
The people that were killed or died in my hands, we had nowhere to put them. We just let them lie where they were. And when things eased off, we buried them. For example, at the bottom of Brunete, there was a place called Mosquito Hill. It was a hill. And below the hill was a valley or dried riverbed. Well, I had a first aid post right at the bottom of the riverbed. And people were dying. We'd nowhere to bury them, only in the bottom of the riverbed. We just buried them there, no tags. We didn't know who they were, half of them who they were. We took their wallets or whatever they had on them. We identified them that way. But they were buried without any identification whatsoever. So God knows what's happened to them. Half of them have been washed away by the river since then. The river's in flood.
We lost really some fine lads in that offensive. And it did lead to a lot of upset on the part of the members of the battalion, and some left the battalion. Some actually found their way home. Some failed to find their way home and were picked up. This is a minority of the battalion, obviously not the bulk of the battalion.
You're talking about desertion.
About desertions, yes. As I say, some found their way back to Britain on boats that were coming into the Spanish ports. A number were picked up inside Spain, were brought into the prison in Albacete, Garda National, and I was having to go to the prison to interview them. And the campaign, I had a discussion with the American commissar, and we had a meeting with the brigade commander, and we are insisting that the desertions were not in the normal sort of category. They were the outcome of a lot of frustration. They were the outcome of a certain amount of conflict in battalion leadership and brigade leadership, clash of personalities mostly, not political.
Just how good were these leaders as soldiers, as distinct from political idealists? What was their background? At Brunete, how well equipped were the commanders to command? Will Painter again.
At that time, the battalion commander was a man named Fred Copeman, who had been in the British Navy, was involved in the Invergordon Mutiny in 1931, and had undergone a certain military training. But it would be correct to say that from the standpoint of understanding strategy and tactics in any kind of depth, that wasn't possible in the circumstances of the Spanish War, although a number of the higher commanders, some from Russia, one from Germany, did have experience of military activity, But generally speaking, at battalion level, I wouldn't say they were naive. I would say they were completely inexperienced and untrained in what was required of commanders in the field. What they learned by experience the hard way.
We crossed the Ebro, the terrible bombardments going on. There was a fascist counteroffensive they broke through. Then it was every man for himself.